Welcome to a new series of features for the Bike Show that I have decided to call, very imaginatively, Head to Head. We'll be taking two things, well, obviously two things, whether that be bikes or helmets or tracks or riders or whatever basically, and discussing which is better and why. From the TV show in South Africa and from our YouTube channel comments sections, we get lots of questions about a whole range of subjects, and this head-to-head format will hopefully give us the opportunity to answer some of those and pass on the sort of information that a lot of you might possibly find useful. I am, at 55 years old, a passionate sport bike rider who has been a professional-ish motorcycle journalist for nearly 3 decades now. My youthful, reckless, speed and risk-taking persona has been tamed over the years, but improved by experience. Unlike my younger self from 20 years ago, who I have noticed strangely looks just as old as me. Steady on. It's just the light that makes me look a bit older, but as far as I'm concerned, you look pretty good for a 65-year-old, whereas I'm just a bit rugged for a 35-year-old. Anyway, lay off the personal insults. It was a bit of a rough night last night, which probably explains a lot. So let's just get on with it. Why have you dragged me out of the past for this chat? I fancied a discussion with someone whose judgment I trust, although... Anyway, we have had a question, in fact this same question more than once, that basically boils down to a choice between two sporting naked bikes, both at or very near the top of their respective classes. One a middleweight and one a full-on super naked. Yeah, get on with it. Enough of the build-up. What are the two bikes? KTM's 1290 Super Duke R and their 890 Duke R. Well, what a stupid question. It's not even worth answering, is it? How disappointingly predictable. The answer of a shallow, thoughtless, unsubtle, inexperienced journalist leaping to a conclusion without even bothering to offer any justification. All right. Keep your hair on. Not that you've got quite as much of that as you thought you had back in the day, eh? The Super Duke is, well, it's super, isn't it? And the 890 is not. The 1290 is much more expensive, and you definitely get what you pay for in this instance. And that's a lot more horsepower. And as we all know, horsepower is good. End of. I generally wouldn't argue with you there, but I will just add that the sport riding equation gets more complex and more subtle the older you get and the more that you understand. Yes, horsepower is wonderful, intoxicating, addictive even, but there's no getting away from the fact that, especially when it comes to riding on the road rather than at the track, it's all too easy to have too much of the stuff. No, really, it is. The Super Duke's 177 horsepower is fantastic when you rev that engine all the way to the red line, but it's the 141 Newton meters of torque that's even more impressive, because that lump of physics, which is what hurls you down the road, is available at much lower RPM, and so that's what you're using most of the time. And even in good conditions, warm, dry, good road surface, sticky tyres, you need the complex electronics package to help you not to fall on your head because he got just that little bit carried away. Fair point, but a super naked, just like a super bike, is designed to be the best sport bike that it's possible to be. So that means outrageous performance. And then it's up to you how much you decide to use and how often. Throttle, remember, it works both ways. If you're young and brave and fast, like me, then you'll gladly take the risks, where appropriate. Even if you only get to go 100% throttle once or twice every ride, then the thrill of experiencing the most impressive or inspiring acceleration that KTM can make is worth it. There's a reason that it's called the Beast and not the Grandma, or actually the Scalpel, which is what the 890R is called. A scalpel, well, it's a teeny weeny knife used by people who wear rubber gloves and make tiny, delicate cuts. Not very exciting. You were almost beginning to make some rational sense then, until the gratuitous scalpel insult, but I can't help agreeing just a little bit that it's something of a naff name. I understand what they're getting at, it's a more precise sporting tool, but still exciting and sort of dangerous. But I don't know, maybe stiletto or machete or demon or savage, or something a bit more exciting than something that you use for surgery. I've been under the surgeon's knife, the scalpel, many times. That's something you've got to look forward to, by the way. And not once was it exciting, or even very frightening. Annoying and painful, that's all I associate with a scalpel. Anyway, you've sidetracked me now, and I have to admit that this is a difficult discussion for me because I absolutely love the Super Duke R. It's a fantastic and fantastically smooth weapon that has a truly epic V-twin motor. And as you know, I love me a big twin-cylinder sport bike. But here's the thing, the 890 Duke R is also a twin, and at 890cc it's not that far off being a big V-twin, despite stupidly somehow being thought of as a middleweight these days. It makes just over 120 horsepower, which is a lot. And here's the crux, if you're into outright speed. I took the bike back to the KTM factory in Mattighoven after riding it for the first time. I'd spent a week in the Alps on the same roads that a week before I'd been riding the Super Duke, and I mentioned to some of the men in orange that I'd actually enjoyed the 890 more than the 1290, and that I thought on a lot of the same roads I'd actually been quicker on it than I had been on the bigger bike. And you know what? They didn't laugh at me, and they didn't tell me to shuffle off and collect my free bus pass, but actually agreed with me and said that their testing had shown pretty much the same thing. Generally, the tighter and more challenging the roads got, the less of a difference in speed between point A and point B, with the 890 actually being quicker in a lot of these situations. And the reason for that, my youthful yob of a friend, is less weight, almost 20 kilos of it, and a more easily manageable, accurate, and dare I say it, scalpel-like handling package. Okay, I can just about see that, but I say, so what? I can easily counter and say that down a fast, sweeping road or at a flowing circuit, the Super Duke will be quicker. But even on a tight road, when it might be fractions of a second slower, it's still more thrilling, more exciting, more of a white knuckle ride. Maybe white knuckle, the sort of exciting that gives you a stress headache. But the 890 is exciting in a different way, because you really feel like you're exploiting much more of its abilities, like you're pushing the bike closer to the edge of its performance envelope. And that's a rewarding feeling, whereas even when you're trying, when you're really trying, the Super Duke can often feel like it's barely awake, like it's dealing with your abilities while having so much in reserve that it's almost sniggering at your feeble attempts to exploit its true potential. Speak for yourself. I am. I'm speaking for ourselves, you moron. Okay, how about this? If you have the money for both, and let's face it, both are pretty expensive. The 890 Duke R is probably the most expensive naked middleweight sport bike, although I'd have to back that up by admitting even, it is also the best. Once you've paid though to unlock all of those electronic extras that you simply got to have if you're buying a sport bike like this to ride as it was meant to be ridden, then you're not getting much change from about, what, 14,500 euros? That's a couple of €1,000 or so more than the basic version of BMW's S1000R, and that has about another, what, 40 or 45 horsepower more? It's more expensive than Suzuki's new GSX 1000 as well, and that's got 150 horsepower. Yeah, the suspension and the brakes and the electronics are top notch, no doubt about it, on the 890R, but they don't come cheap. Well, some of them even as standard, which is a bit of a cheek. But then you'll be paying another 5,000 to 6,000 euros for the 1290R, although that does make it seem like more of a bargain considering what it's up against. Anyway, let me not get sidetracked this time. What I'm trying to say is that if you've got the money, surely you'd buy the bigger bike, if only for the simple reason that if you don't, then everyone's just going to think that you were too poor to get the 1290. It's like having a Porsche Cayman instead of the 911. The only reason that you do that is you're not quite rich enough for the grown-up man's Porsche. That is so shallow. Yeah, but so true. Yeah, but if you've got the strength of character and the courage of your convictions and are not bothered, as you shouldn't be, about what other people think, then I reckon there is definitely a case for taking the 890R. I love the feeling of really thrashing a bike, of a nimble chassis, of a bike that lets you take a few liberties without immediately biting your head off for the slightest mistake. The Scalpel is that bike. But the Super Duke, as I've seen you admit in your own tests, is just so civilised now, so easy to ride, brilliant handling, and an engine that will undoubtedly go down in history as one of the great V-twins. It's an easy choice for me. I can't believe age has changed you so much. Last chance, would you really take the 890? No. It's close because both are fantastic bikes, and that's the problem, I suppose. I stand by everything I've said about the 890 Duke R, but that engine in the Super Duke just cannot be ignored. I have to admit that I'd take the 1290. What a ridiculously long-winded way to say that I was right all along. Basically, it sounds like you haven't learned anything in the past 20 years. Or is that the next 20 years? I'm afraid that's it for me. I'm out of here. Give me a call when you want to be proved wrong again. How rude. What a really nice bloke. I'll just summarise then and say that given how close is the call that we have to make between the two, you can rest happy whichever model that you have or that you want, because they're genuinely two absolutely stunning sport bikes. But the thrill of 141 Newton meters of easily available torque, well, that's hard to beat.